we hope we can continue to imagine collaboration on knowledge products moving forward and research ideas in this poorly studied area. But yeah, since it's almost time, I'll let us start the webinar, and then we can. Thank you so much. You're muted.
The webinar started. Let's just start the prayer too. You pray. Yeah.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's session, Faith and Environment. The theme of today is rethinking religion and state and integrating faith in environmental governance while remaining a secular state. Apologies for any echo. But before we start, we shall start with a prayer from Stella Ruto. Welcome, Stella.
Hi, let us pray. Thank you, Lord, for this day. We thank you for bringing us here all together. We pray that we'll have a fruitful discussion that will be very educative and everything will go smoothly. I pray this prayer trusting and believing in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
To
To
introduce
introduce our first speaker today, her name is Ms. Angelique Muhavani. She is the UN Environment, she's an intern, a project intern at UN Environmental Program. She's working in the Regional Office for Africa under the Chemicals, Waste Management and Air Equality Subprogram. So she will be answering one question, which is how can African traditional beliefs and religious practices be integrated into modern environmental conservation strategies to foster sustainable development. Further, she will be outlining the rationale behind this question. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Angeli.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So good afternoon. First of all, thank you. I'm extremely grateful to be invited as a panelist. So thank you very much to the Kaberg University Press, to Nobintu Wanchiku, and to the entire team behind the Faith Environment Project. So as been stated, I have been asked to speak about how African traditional beliefs and religious practices can be integrated into modern environmental conservation strategies to foster sustainable development. Given that my background is in law, there's going to be a bit of a legal angle to my answer, but I hope that by the end of my presentation, I would have given a sufficient answer to the question. So there's rich and growing research linking religious beliefs to environmentalism. Policy may be informed by religious teachings, sharing a universal stance on the inherent dignity and value of nature. John Beatty asserted that Africans are notoriously religious. Religion permeates into all departments of life so fully that it is not always possible to isolate it or to separate it. It's well documented that psychological structures such as beliefs and values can in fact influence individual actions, activism, donation, and environmentalism. It's on this basis that some scholars have drawn attention to African eco-spirituality, which is understood to be the African view of life as the highest gift, and thus the supremacy of Mother Earth. Fun fact, the preamble to the Paris Agreement explicitly notes that the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems and the protection of biodiversity, recognized by some cultures as Mother Earth. This reverence and respect then translates into a social responsibility to care for the environment. So ladies and gentlemen, I put forward to you that traditional African beliefs and religious practices can provide the spirit of environmentalism, capable of spurring transformative action beyond conventional legal and scientific approaches when it comes to environmental governance. For this, we would have to look beyond formal law, what Sylvia Kangara and Claude Kamau call the inclusive subordination of African customary law, which is essentially when the legal system is formally accepted, but its application heavily qualified or limited. This is primarily in favor of an alternative regime of law. Take, for example, the repugnancy clause in the Kenyan Constitution. Now, obviously, religion and culture are two separate concepts, but when you look at African cultures and African tradition, you can't help but recognize that there are some overlaps of the two, and in many instances, they coincide. The preference for formal inherited laws and policies influenced by former colonial powers, often over traditional laws and customs, is recognized further in the adoption of ethical principles more aligned to Judeo-Christian sources as opposed to African traditional sources. This is what Professor Kamari Mbota was getting at when she noted that legal pluralism is often discussed as modern versus customary law. However, religious norms also present a normative paradox in traditional versus mainstream religions. And so acknowledging the influence that mainstream religious norms have on post-colonial and modern day culture, society, and by extension, law, when you remember the feedback loop between law and morality, then we open our eyes to the unintended discrimination against African religious values and practices. And with it, unfair rejection of the good it can bring to our legal and political regime, especially when it comes to environmental governance. Now, there's some examples of African eco-spirituality that I've outlined from 3 countries. Beginning with Malawi, we have the Chewa people of southern Malawi who consider the Mponda and Kalamba forests as sacred, used as altars where elders pour libation in order to avert drought. In Botswana, a number of ethnic groups such as the Bakwena and Bangwato, the chiefs in a number of ethnic groups such as the Bakwena and Bangwato, the chiefs representing the will of the ancestors have prohibited certain trees from being cut down during the rainy season because they are considered female trees associated with the fertility of the land. It is believed that cutting them down will cause hailstorms and deathly winds. Moreover, wildlife is conserved when believed to represent totems for communities, specifically giraffes, buffaloes, and pythons. Protected by the chiefs, the belief is held that hunting these animals or killing them would bring illness and death to the community. Similarly, in Zimbabwe, among the Shona people, certain animals associated with the founding of a clan and dedicated to ancestral spirits are protected and conserved. They include the hippo, the water python, the fish eagle, antelopes, and lions. The Shona have also an environmental consciousness that seeks to protect water resources. They have taboos that prohibit the abuse of wetlands, rivers, and wells. So as you can see, there are a number of examples related to African eco-spirituality across different African countries and different communities that we can draw lessons from within our legal and political regime. So there's potential, when we look at the potential of going beyond formal law in this aspect, we note that incorporating African traditional practices in environmental governance does three things. Well, at least three things. Firstly, it denotes the legitimization of African customary law. Secondly, it promotes a just transition and a tailored approach to sustainable development that embraces rather than replaces age-old cultural identity in the name of environmental protection. It also develops an ecocentric approach to environmental conservation in the sense that it respects the oneness of nature with human existence, and thus the acknowledgement of the symbiotic relationship where people can live in communion with nature and not dominated for selfish needs. A possible advancement that could result from this wholeness approach is the establishment of the rights of nature within the environmental law frameworks of several African nations. Taking Ecuador as inspiration, a country where the rights of nature are enshrined within the constitution, or even in New Zealand, where 2 acts have been passed, establishing the legal personhood of a river and forest due to the spiritual value placed on them by the Maori peoples. Now, I would be remiss in failing to acknowledge the possible conflict of interest, which is mentioned in today's theme, secularism. I see that we shall go into it later in a bit more detail in the program. But just to speak a bit on the matter, coming from Kenya, I know that Article 8 of the Constitution provides that there shall be no state religion. And the conventional understanding of secularism is the strict separation of church and state. A beneficial principle indeed, considering it's dependent on not merely the state refraining from interfering with religious dogma, but also religion from interfering with state and governance activity. But Kenya's position on the principle, as I suspect is similar in a number of African countries, is ill understood at times. Religion is ubiquitous to the Kenyan people, and its influence bleeds into governance one way or another. But of importance to note is that Kenya is a diverse country, and what in a certain lens may be seen as a violation of the separation principle may in another lens be understood as tolerance and especially inclusion. I just wanted to highlight that point, especially when we talk about indigenous knowledge and practices from traditional religious beliefs. We're often talking about minority groups. So the aspect of inclusion is something that I think should be stressed in this discussion. So as you can see, there are degrees to secularism. It's not always black and white, especially in a very diverse society. In Kenya, for example, we have the Kadhi's Court, the mention of a deity in the preamble of the Constitution. There are a number of examples that display the ubiquity of religion within this society. So as I close, I ask everyone to at least entertain the possibility that sustainable solutions to the triple planetary crisis, being climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution in Africa, may actually be found in the spiritual heritage, ethics, and faith traditions of our people. So to ignore that potential is to do ourselves a grave injustice and to essentially shoot ourselves in the foot when several solutions could be right before our very eyes. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Angelique, for that concise discussion. But one thing I actually get from you is that we cannot ignore spiritual heritage, and for me that is very important. To introduce our second speaker, it's Ms. Miriam Ngozi Alike, who is a lecturer of philosophy at Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Nigeria. She will be discussing 2 questions. The first question would be, to what extent does Western secularism hinder or enhance Africa's ability to leverage its religious and cultural heritage in addressing contemporary environmental challenges? And then secondly, how can the principles of the triple heritage, that is indigenous, Islamic, and Western influences, be harmonized to create a holistic approach to environmental conservation in Africa? Welcome, Ms. Ngozi.
Thank you once again. First of all, I need to thank you people for having me here. It's a pleasure, and I'm grateful. Now, before I'll start, I'll just simply try to define the concept of faith. You know, I have the references. So when you talk about faith, you talk about a concept that is found in many religious traditions, including Protestantism, Catholicism, and Buddhism. Sometimes faith is related to a system of religious beliefs. Faith also holds secular connotations. Now we talk about our environment. Our environment can be defined. You have so many definitions of environment, according to scientists, biologists, depends who is involved. And when you talk about environment, it depends where the person is talking about. But generally, environment can be defined as a sum total of all the living and non-living elements and their effects that influence human life. Why all living or biotic elements are animals, plants, forests, fisheries, and pets. Non-living or abiotic elements include water, land, sunlight, rocks, and the air. Now, after defining these two concepts, I'll say let me, in a simplest form or sense, define religion, because we are talking about environment, faith, and religion. When you talk about religion, religion describes the relationship of human beings to what those people regard as holy, what they regard as sacred, spiritual, or even divine. It is usually accompanied by a set of organized practices which foster a community of people who share that faith. Now, coming to Western, my topic, based on my question given to me, Western secularism and Africa's environmental resilience, exploring the paradox of contemporary environmental challenges, which is to answer my question on what extent does Western secularism hinder or enhance Africa's ability to leverage its religious and cultural heritage in addressing contemporary environmental challenges? Now, the intersection of Western secularism and Africans' environmental resilience has sparked intense debate among scholars. As Africa faces pressing environmental challenges such as climate change, flooding, which we are witnessing here in Nigeria, deforestation, and water scarcity, the role of Western secularism in shaping our environmental policies and practices has become increasingly pertinent. Secularism, noted in Enlightenment values, emphasizes reason, individualism, and separation of religion from public life. That is, you must separate a religious belief from the life of the people. There is no need to attach religious belief to people. Whatever they want, whatever the people they need will be given because they are humans and are citizens of a country. No need to attach the particular religion the person or the people are adhered to or adhering to. So, however, this paradigm may overlook or undermine Africa's rich cultural heritage and traditional ecological knowledge. Now, Africa's environmental challenges are intricately linked to colonialism, globalization, and cultural exchange. However, Western secularism influence on African environmental governance raises critical questions. Does secularism enhance or hinder Africa's ability to address environmental challenge? Can African traditional values and spiritual practices inform effective environmental resilience? This is what I'm going to look at and explore these paradoxes while examining the cultural dynamics of environmental governance in Africa. Now, looking at challenges of environment through African heritage or culture, there are significances or importance of what they are there to do for us. Now, for example, you have contextualizing environmental governance. By examining Western secularism impact on African environmental policies, there is a need for sensitive governance approaches. Number two, we have decolonizing environmental knowledge, where the intersections of secularism and traditional ecological knowledge helps to rebalance dominant Western narratives. Another one, our ability to understand cultural and spiritual values underlying African environmental practices that can also foster innovative solutions. For example, where I came from here, from the Southeast, there are rivers. There is no need for you to go to that river with a rag, a towel on your head. You need to remove your towel and you need to go there barefooted so that the water there will be clean. And there is nothing like washing of clothes there or washing of plates, so that the little things in that river will be clean. There will be no degradation of the environment or pollution of the environment. And there are rules guiding the community concerning the river. You know, this is what preserving this river. And there are forests that avoid deforestation. No matter what, we dare not cut any tree. And there are crops our people plant in a swampy area that helps to minimize the effects of flooding. You know, so that with the knowledge of cultural practices, we are determined to use those cultural practices to help the environment. Remember that Africans, that our culture conflicts with our religion. That is why we have traditions and customs. Because of the Western religion or Christianity, some of the customs or good ones or traditions have been neglected. But here, the people who are authentic worshippers or traditional rulers try to adhere to those practices. For example, during the time of famine, the mother earth, the land, is known as a deity. People used to do sacrifices to appease the god of the land, so that when they farm, they have to have good yields. And during the harvest, people will also try to thank the earth goddess. That is why in Igbo land, you have so many festivals to thank the earth goddess for fertility. And the most prominent one is New Yam Festival. New Yam Festival is a time to thank the mother deity, Mother Earth, for the fertility of the land and for the good use from the agriculture. We have also theoretical advancements. When you talk about theoretical advancements, you talk about post-colonial ecocentrism, where you talk about environmental justice and secularism studies. Now, Western secularism's influence on African environmental policies and practices is complex and multifaceted. For example, you have the influence on our environmental policies. We have the separation of religion and states. Secularism can lead to neglect of traditional spiritual values in environmental policy. That is why here where I came from, you see the people who are called traditionalists. If there are policies they believe that is not for them, they'll be shouting, making an announcement. No, we are the custodians of tradition and custom, and we are included in whatever is being done for the people. There is no need to seclude us because we are not Christians, or because we are not Catholics, we are not Anglicans, or because we are not Pentecostals. So that is one of the effects of secularism. Now there is individualism and private property, where secularism can promote exploitation of natural resources. There is also known as alignment and contracts. which we can have with our African traditional ecological knowledge. In terms of alignment, we have respect for our nature. Both secular and traditional African perspectives value nature's importance. It is very, very important. For example, here in Oka, in Anambra State, they have animism or totemism where we use, where you see monkeys. Once you see monkeys, you don't kill it because they believe that monkeys are their gods, which helped them during the war. There are stories for that, and the festivals that are celebrated known as Imoka. Then you have the pythons, which are more peculiar in the riverine areas known as Idemmili. And these are aspects of community-based conservation that are community-based. Now, in terms of contrast to this alignment, we have spiritual connection. African traditional knowledge emphasizes spiritual relationship with nature, whereas secularism may dismiss this because they don't believe on any religion. It's separate because what they are is human-centeredness. They are focused on humans. Now we have holistic worldview, where African cultures often view humans, nature, and spirits, which are interconnected. And they contrast with secularism primary focus on human beings. Now, Western secularism influence on African environmental policies and practice is complex. One, it has separation of religion and states. It lays emphasis on scientific rationality or Western scientific approaches, which may overshadow our indigenous knowledge. It dwells on individualism and private property. Secularism can promote exploitation of our natural resources. For example, where they are drilling the oil, though oil is a natural resources, but damaging the natural habitat there. When you see their river is black, the birds, everything, their habitat is nothing to write home about because of what? Exploitation of the natural resources, which is oil in the Niger Delta area. You have challenges and opportunities concerning these hindrances. And when you talk about the challenges, you talk about cultural erosion and the loss of traditional knowledge, because when you lay emphasis on secularism, people will now try to deviate from their tradition and their culture. You have power imbalance between Western and African perspectives. People will try to know ancient and modern, our culture and practices, are they archaic? No, they are not. We need to be custodians of our culture, custom, and their tradition. There is also integration of secular and their spiritual approaches. There are ways that our forefathers used to approach our give light to our spiritual divinities, our divinities. But sometimes due to westernization, urbanization, globalization, secularism, modern theory or contemporary time, they try to mingle with that and try to see that as something that is not obtainable. Like when you talk about ethno-philosophy, one of the trends of philosophy, some argue that ethno-philosophy is not philosophy, but some argue that ethno-philosophy, which was our sages, our ancestors, are what philosophy is, like the battle between secularism and an African cultural heritages. Now, there is a need to harmonize. The second question, harmonizing the triple heritage of indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, African and Western influences, which can create a powerful holistic approach to our environmental conservation in Africa. Now we have our indigenous influences. And when you talk about the indigenous influences, you can talk about traditional ecological knowledge, where we integrate local communities' knowledge and practices. in conservation efforts. During the olden times, there are ways that they used to announce when there will be flood, when there will be harmattan, stuff like that. And there are things people used to do, to avoid such, and which one of them is spiritual. Only the elders know what they do. The younger ones don't know it until they are grown and they are taught how to commune with the gods. And when they do all these things, it works. So there is a need for us to bring out back our culture and our African heritage,
Apologies. Our panelist seems to have dropped out. Oh, she's back. She's back. Miss Miriam, Dr. Miriam, kindly unmute.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, my network tripped up. I have up to 3 networks. I'm sorry, this one tripped up. So I'm talking about indigenous influences on traditional ecological knowledge, where we integrate local communities, knowledge and practices in conservation efforts, which our forefathers used to do. And that, like I said earlier, is from our elders that come in with the gods and they know what to do. And you see this drought, flooding, climate change, it doesn't really happen. So there is a need to bring back all this to our modern world so that we'll have a better environment. We have community-based conservation where local communities are empowered to manage natural resources through divine powers anyway, and of course through spiritual connection where we recognize spiritual relationship with nature. We have traditional African influence. We have Ubuntu, which we all know as where there is a relationship between ourselves and nature. We have communalism, relationship between people living together. We have Ujama, where I am because we are. And when all these collective responsibilities are there, we become our brother's keeper. We watch our backs. That when there is something to happen, you have the information. Maybe you're a seer, you are closer to the gods, you move with the gods, or you are closer. You make the announcement because everybody belongs to you. We are all together. Then in this African cosmology, we incorporate cultural and philosophical perspectives on nature and humans. We also have our community-led initiatives that support these traditional conservation practices. Now, we have Western influence, scientific research, policy frameworks, and technology, which has affected us. We have knowledge of them, but yet, our traditional methods, I will tell you, are the best methods. There are benefits of our traditional methods. You have enhanced biodiversity conservation. You have improved community livelihoods. You have increased cultural relevance and ownership. You have more effective policy implementation and even holistic understanding of human-nature relations. In as much as all these things are there, we have our challenges. For example, where you have a power imbalance between stakeholders or between people or between two elderly that may say, I'm supposed to be the spokesman or the spokeswoman, stuff like that. We have our cultural and knowledge integration complexities. Yes, we are from the same cultural background, but I may believe in power A, you may believe in power B. Sometimes there are complexities. Now we have funding and resource constraints, but sometimes most of our traditional Africa doesn't need that money per se, and you have policy and legislative hurdles. Sometimes all these things our legislative people don't want to legislate them, but people on their own go ahead to do that for the benefit of the society. There are ways forward that will help us. We have to foster dialogue among stakeholders, build capacity for integrated research and management. We develop context-sensitive policies, we support our community-led initiatives, and we promote education and awareness, which is very important. When you educate people, you create awareness, they are aware. that such things happen. And by embracing the triple heritage, Africa can develop a unique, effective, and sustainable approach to environmental conservation. I'll conclude this by saying that this study or this faith and environment people are doing will have to unravel the complex relationships between Western secularism and Africa's environmental resilience, shedding light on the opportunities and challenges for effective environmental governance. And this is the right time for us to tell our own stories in our own African voices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miriam, for explaining to us quite succinctly on heritage, on African heritage, and the ways we can actually work towards harmonizing and recognizing our collective responsibility. There is something when you talk about our traditional best practices and how we can incorporate that back into our community, I find that very, very insightful. Now, our third panelist is running a bit late. Her name is Greshma Piers. She is currently attending the Summit of the Futures in New York, and she's part of a panel session that should be concluded in a minute or so. But before she comes in, I have a question addressed to Ms. Miriam or Dr. Miriam or any of the panelists really. From what you have said from John Nesbitt's Africans being notoriously religious, but then it trickling down to the triple heritage, and from all this, what I'm trying to get is that an African is an embodiment of multiple templates. So how do we, because we're talking about harmonizing, but then there is a problem rather, because how then are we supposed to approach this? What's the framework we're using, or what's the model we're working with? Yes, thank you. I'm being told to repeat my question. Okay, so basically what I'm actually trying to ask is what is the way forward in implementing the traditional best practices that our doctor has alluded to? Oh, I had muted. Yes, I was asking our kind panelists to actually respond. Thank you. We can start with Ms. Miriam and Dr. Angelique, yes.
I asked a question, my network. Hello, Esther, was I asked a question?
My sincerest apologies. The question was, you have alluded to traditional best practices, and you have succinctly explained that implementing this would require us to actually recognize our collective responsibility. And the question is, what framework can we actually adopt in doing this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe our framework should start from our community. That is community-based framework. And when you talk about community-based framework, you have our elders, we have our kindred, and you have the head of the towns. When they come together to have a framework over flooding, over climate change, or whatever it takes to preserve our environment, over forestation, I believe when they implement it as a law within a community, it spreads. For example, I know there are communities growing up in the village. When you go to the village, there are things you need to do to maybe to go and fetch a firewood. They will say, no, this doesn't belong to us. And you dare cross it, you don't cross to get a firewood there. So there is a need for the community-based framework. The communities know who and who are there. They know the elders, they know the people, they know those who can help. Spiritual means, and when I talk spiritual means, you know, African culture, we believe so much on spirituality and divinities. You know, there are people who doesn't go to church. There are people who goes to church. We have our traditions. We have our traditions. There are things that are not against the Christian God. It's for the benefit of the people. So when the community comes together to say, yes, we agree on this, on these principles during harvesting, during burials, and so this on this, we come together and do it. I remember there is something, collective means women who are known as Umuada. And when you talk about Umuada, you talk about the first daughters married all over the world. Once there is kindred and maybe the woman or the man is doing headstrong, when they come together, everything is solved. So when the community come together, then the spirit of Ubuntu and the spirit of communalism, the spirit of Uchama come together and say, we'll do this for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of our future, for the benefit of the future generation of our children. Let's preserve our environment by ourselves and not outsiders. I think it should be implemented and complemented, and people should know this, and the things will move ahead and will preserve the environment, and it becomes greener for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answer. What I understand from it is that the African's strength lies in community. Yes. Do we have other additions from our panelists? Welcome, Ms. Angela.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I've been having a few network issues. Okay, so when we think of the way forward, I think of a number of ways we can approach it. You think of the responsibilities that each sector can have in promoting, or rather raising awareness on ways in which we can extract environmental values from religious beliefs and how that can be incorporated in particularly environmental governance. Because when you look at something as fundamental as, you know, the triple planetary crisis, and you look at the approaches that have been taken to solve this problem, the foundational sub-programs and then the enabling sub-programs. The foundational sub-programs are on science, policy, and environmental governance. The enabling sub-programs are on finance and economic transformations and digital transformations. So where I see the role of ethics and values is primarily in environmental governance. So I think there's a huge gap to be filled by academia. You know, we have a number of professors in the room with us who are doing the good work of raising awareness and educating young professionals going into various fields, legal and policy alike, where they can, you know, they can then go on to develop and write about policies and laws that can be implemented and used, taking an integrated approach, considering an avenue from religious values and norms within environmental governance. We also have the role of civil society, and particularly with multi-sectoral engagement and dialogue. So we have interfaith initiatives where not just, dominant discuss a variety of global issues. It's important to also include African traditional religious beliefs into these dialogues. I don't know if we're all aware, but for example, Laudato Si is quite popular and renowned among the members of the Catholic faith. It would be beneficial to see other similar initiatives drawn out from African religious beliefs as well, and not just the dominant faith sectors. That's it for me, primarily on that question. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Muhavani. Yes, we now open the floor to other members of the audience who have a question, a clarification that they require. Please, you're welcome to either ask a question or type it in the chat. Thank you.
Oh, yes, maybe if I can ask a question. This question was actually directed to one of our panelists, Greshma, but she's not yet in. The question is, how can secular governance models adapt to include the positive environmental aspect of religion and culture? These questions seek to balance state secularism with culture and religious values in policymaking. So that's the question. How can secular governance models adapt to include positive environmental aspects of religions and culture? I'll be very happy to hear from Angelique because she works for UN now, and of course to hear a philosophical view also from Miriam, Professor Miriam Ngozi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Letitia, for your questions. I believe we can take two more from the audience. Victoria Okeke, welcome. Okay, while we are waiting for Victoria to ask a question, maybe we can have Cecilia. I see your hands raised. Okay, seemingly we are having a bit of a concern with unmuting your devices. So as Ms. Angelique and Dr. Miriam answer the questions posed by Letitia, Cecilia, and Victoria. If you could kindly type out your questions, be very grateful. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Angelique.
Okay. So the concept of secularism, I find it very fascinating, to be very honest with you, because as I mentioned briefly, I think the conventional understanding of secularism is that's primarily practiced in, Western countries. When we look at France, for instance, where there's a very strict separation between church and state. However, I think that in certain countries, among certain populations, where religion is very ubiquitous, it's a core identity of the people, then there's a bit more leeway, and the strict understanding of secularism just cannot apply. So as much as the law may state that there can be no state religion, you'll find that there's a nice middle ground in the sense of what some scholars call secularity, where it's more passive secularism. If you take Kenya, for example, we have the mention of God in the preamble of our constitution. We have Qadi's courts, which are religious courts. We have religion incorporated in the public education system. Religious studies are incorporated in the public education system. And just in a number of public and even governance activities, religion is littered, the influence of religion is littered here and there, and that just displays the ubiquity of religion within the Kenyan society. So I think a nuanced approach should be taken when considering how to incorporate religion within environmental governance and even in other aspects of societal matters. Because especially in a diverse country where religion is an integral part of the identity of the people, then strict separation might not be the way. But that's just a short answer. There's a lot more on it. I'll let the next panelist proceed with her presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Muhavani. Ms. Miriam.
Came in.
Yes.
Can I ask you the question? Sorry, I was out and came back. My network.
The question was, how can secular governance models adapt to include the positive environmental aspects of religion and culture?
Sorry?
How can secular governance models
Yes, I
adapt
didn't hear you. Sorry.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yes, I was asking, or Letitia was asking rather, how can secular governance models adapt to include the positive environmental aspects of religion and culture?
There is a need for such adaptation, because when you talk about secularism, it doesn't talk about religion, but yet centered on human, focused on human beings. So there is a need for that, to believe that whatever that is done, whatever promulgation, whatever that is to be done, conservation, Anything to do for the environment is for the betterment of the society. There is no need to attach a religion, but to let it be focused on human beings. In as much as like what Angelic said about the methods we use must align to UN forever. Sure, sustainable development goals. So there is a need to map out whatever intervention a community is to be done or a state should be done. It's for the benefit of all, irrespective of religion or non-religion. It should be focused on the people that are there. And it should align to their communal life. It should align to their culture and their traditions and customs. Because what is applicable to these people might not be applicable to the other. So the people there should be the focus, and the cultural aspects of their lives should be the focus as well, so that everything should align together and everyone should be happy as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Ms. Muhavani and Dr. Ngozi for that. Yes, we would like to welcome our third panelist. She is in. Our third panelist is Greshma Fires. She is the founder of EcoPeace Teen Cafe, and she is also a youth council member of the UNEP Faith for Earth initiative. Welcome, Ms. Greshma. And the question you will be addressing today would be, in what ways can faith-based organizations across Africa learn from India to address environmental degradation? Secondly, be answering the question that was answered initially by our other panelists. How can secular governance models adapt to include the positive environmental aspects of religion and culture? Finally, thank you for making the time to join us today. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Esther. And thanks for giving this opportunity and like for inviting me to this event. So thank you. And as like answering your question, so I like when I hear this question, like learning from India, like I was thinking like how how to frame this answer. So maybe I can share some of the examples and initiatives happening in India, which may be like good to like incorporate in Africa also, but it depends on like how the country and how the context are. So I'm just sharing like some of our experience and some of our learnings. So India in addressing state secularism while integrating culture and religious values into policy making, particularly in environmental sustainability, like it's mostly like emphasis on Sarva Dharma Sambhava, like equal respect for all religions, offer a model where the government recognizes the importance of religious diversity while maintaining a secular stance in governance. Even the constitution is also giving that freedom of practicing religion and like giving equal importance to all religions and all practices. So this framework provides valuable insights for balancing state neutrality with the inclusion of faith-based values in addressing issues like environmental degradation. So I'm a interfaith peace builder. So I have like kind of several years of experience in interfaith peace building, like working with various interfaith leaders and various community actors, and bringing them together and having interfaith dialogues and promoting the environment conservation. Like we bring together people from diverse backgrounds, diverse religious backgrounds together for climate action. And specifically, I'm currently focusing more on that and working with various religious groups and especially young people and bringing them on climate action and talking about climate change and how to use their opportunities and how to use the religious ideology and turning them into climate actions. And I know like Africa is also like very diverse and having different religious communities. So interfaith, and I know like in Africa there are like interfaith organizations are working really hard and religious organizations like Religions for Peace and interfaith organizations like United Religions Initiative are really active in most of the African countries. And I also learned about interfaith dialogues which are happening in the conflict affected places in Nigeria and in Kenya. Like lots of things are also happening there. So this is one thing we can like really promote, interfaith collaborations. And also when talking about like how we can integrate the culture and religious values in policies, India's history of weaving religious and cultural values into environmental movements like Chipko movement highlights how faith-based values can drive grassroots environmentalism. So this is really like visible in India, like especially the grassroots organizations actively participating in environment conservations, and faith-based organizations are contributing their efforts and advocating for policy changes and bringing more environment conservation practices. And also religious institutions are really collaborating with the government bodies like local self-governments and NGOs on projects related to clean energy, waste management, and also reforestation. So this thing can be like adopted or inspired in African communities, and I'm not sure like whether it's already happening in the African communities. And yeah, and also we can like really inspired from the religious scriptures. So all the religious scriptures are really sharing like how especially the angle of eco spirituality, like we can really inspired by religious scriptures like Bible, like how it from the beginning itself it talks about the nature and environment. So and the influence of Laudato Si. So how we can incorporate all these scriptures to our daily life. So coming to secular governance model in Africa, like it could benefit by acknowledging the role that religious and cultural practices play in environmental conservation and incorporating religious leaders into environmental advisory councils. And India has done this in some cases and could ensure that policies are culturally relevant and widely accepted by communities. So these are some the common points, and by finding common grounds between secular governance and religious principles, African countries can develop a holistic approach to environmental sustainability that respect both state secularism and cultural richness of their populations. And I know, like as a peace builder, I learned a lot about the African countries and the conflicts happening there. So I always kind of like advocating for the local actions and empowering the women. And we know like there are really successful models in Liberia and many other countries. So like empowering women, empowering families on environmental actions and bringing more peace in the community is really important. So let's begin that from the families also. Like while we talk about governance and secular governments, um, let's share that spirit in our own communities, local communities through the family. Like let's begin from our own families, and yeah, let's start doing the environmental activism. And we know like in both Africa and Asian countries, like we are struggling a lot because of the environmental crisis and because of the climate change crisis. So we need like more such learning spaces and more collaborations, and let's do the work together. And thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thanks for bringing me to this. I'm just like coming from another webinar space. So thanks for waiting for me, and thanks for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Ms. Grashma. Yes, there are a few questions in the chat, a Q&A session, and Victoria Okeke is directing her question to Ms. Angelique. She's asking, well, my question is as regards the harmonization of the triple heritage and incorporation of religious beliefs in environmental governance. How far can this be achieved, especially in light of the repugnancy clause, which is applicable in most, if not all, African countries. This is also in line with the discussion about anything repugnant to justice and morality, and what's the standard to show for justice and morality. And finally, what is the basis of this judgment? That question is directed to Ms. Angelique. And then secondly, Anne Kariuki is asking, in light of globalization, how does an African youth maintain and sustain the place of our unique power of African religion, beliefs, and culture in environmental discourses, even as we interact, exchange, and mingle with other civilizations, cultures, and especially modernism? Well, yes, if we could have Ms. Angelique answering the first question and Ms. Grashma and Dr. Ngozi answering the second by Anne Kariuki. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Mohavani. Ms. Mohavani, kindly unmute.
Okay, can you hear me from here?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry for the technical confusion. So how far can this goal be achieved? Well, it's a valid question. The repugnancy clause is definitely it can in some ways be seen as a challenge. However, I think the clause does have some merit as well. Justice and morality are key tenets of the constitution that we have today in Kenya, and I believe in every African constitution. And I think investigating what justice and morality is to a particular nation is a valid initiative to take, and that's something that courts have been tackling throughout the years, especially post-colonial years. But I think we can begin by, it seems like such a daunting task, advancing religion and environmentalism as a joint goal and activity. However, I still think there's hope in the sense that we can, through dialogue, like academic dialogue and, policy dialogue, we can develop our understanding of what religion is and how religion can be incorporated, the space for religion in governance and policy in a number of matters. Not too long ago, I went for a conference on the role of ethics, beliefs, and values in amplifying action against plastic pollution in Africa, considering that there's a plastic pollution treaty in negotiation as we speak. So if at the international level, the initiatives and efforts are being made to incorporate cultural values, traditions, and beliefs, and I don't think it's too much of an ask to do the same within regional and national jurisdictions. When we think of what Casanova said regarding the deprivatization of religion and when it can be justified, he mentions that religion enters the public sphere to safeguard not just its own freedom, but the freedom and rights that accrue to others. So considering multi-sectoral and interconnected issues such as this, where we see that religion coincides with cultural values and rights, as well as African customary law, religious law, and environmental law, and ultimately the goal is environmental protection, then it's not too hard to believe that values, norms, and morals can be derived from the former to advance the latter, especially when we think of it in terms of ethics and taking a people-centered approach, as Prof mentioned earlier, looking at trying to create a solution to the environmental crisis that's currently facing, that we are currently facing in Africa and a lot of countries around the world, especially developing states, that takes an ecocentric approach and looks at ways of incorporating a solution that's inclusive and autochthonous to the people of the nations. So I don't have a concrete answer with regards to how far it can go, but I believe that through dialogue, especially at the academic and policy levels, then with a developed understanding of these concepts, then we can slowly integrate the incorporation of religious and ethics beliefs within our governance, policy, and lawmaking. Yes, that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Muhavani, for that. If Dr. Ngozi and Ms. Kashma could answer our second question.
Okay. Thank you once again for the opportunity. Now, for us to maintain and sustain our African religion, beliefs, and culture in environmental discourses amidst globalization requires some efforts like preserving our traditional knowledge, learn from our elders, we document and study our traditional ecological knowledge. Then our language preservation, we need to maintain our African languages, preserve our cultural heritage, and that should be cultural education where we integrate African cultural studies in our formal education. For example, I remember when we were growing up, we hear about the rainmakers, and we see them, they gather stones, they gather leaves, though we don't know what they do. Before you know it, the other one will come there, will be taught that. So we're like, why can't they teach us these things? So that if there is, during Hamatan, we need rain, the children can gather the stones and the leaves and make rain, for the community. Stuff like that, the indigenous cultural education should be integrated in our formal education. And there is a need to decolonize our environmentalism challenge, Western dominated narratives. There is a need for us to decolonize them. Then we have to emphasize on our Afrocentric approaches, and we can even engage in intercultural dialogue, cultural exchange programs. When you go to, when you look at what is happening in the world, you see cultural programs. There's one I watched, I think one of the Asian countries, there is something that they developed culturally, and they were cleaning their river. It was dirty, and they were packing all sorts of dust from the river, trying to make their river clean. So if there is cultural exchange programs, I believe people will learn.
We seem to have lost Dr. Ngozi. Therefore, as we wait for her to respond, maybe if Greshma could proceed with the response. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Thanks for the question. And yeah, in the light of globalization, how an African youth maintain and sustain the place of the unique power. So I think it's really important for anyone, like not just African youth, but for anyone to be like hold on their roots and to understand the deep values and continue that legacy and like from an Indian perspective or from an Asian perspective, looking at African continent and seeing people, we really appreciate like the idea of Ubuntu and also the rich African traditions and the culture. So it's really important to important to learn what we are inherit from our elders and also the indigenous knowledge, especially while talking about the environment and climate actions or protecting the environment. We really need to uh, like understand the indigenous knowledge as well, like how they protect our environment and how we can inherit their practices. So as mentioned earlier, I'm founder of Ecopeace Teen Cafe, and in our circle, we are trying to really understand what our indigenous communities like, what were their practices and what are they currently doing, and how can we incorporate that in our daily life for uh, uh, like for a better and sustainable environment. Like how can we incorporate that? And also Ecopeace Teen Cafe conducted programs earlier for the African people, like especially in French, and we had like a really good dialogues with the African youth, and they were sharing their challenges and their opportunities in working for environment and climate action. So understanding our opportunity, like understanding our strength and challenges are really important, and also like balancing. I think this is my personal opinion, like balancing the modernism and also rooting on our own culture. So it's both are important to be like equipped for the modern world and also rooting on our own traditions. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greshma, for your answer. Seeing as Dr. Ngozi is not yet back in, I would like to first of all thank you all for your thoughts. They're indeed invaluable. I'd also like to thank our audience members, Victoria Okeke, Anne Kariuki, and Letitia, for their questions as well. I believe they have been satisfactorily answered. Now, well, that wraps up our Q&A session. To our final closing remarks, we'd like to welcome Mr. Humphrey Sipala. He's the editor-in-chief of the Kabarak University Press and also a lecturer. Welcome, Mr. Sipala.
Thank you, Blessing. Thank you, the panelists, Dr. Ngozi, Angelique, Greshma. I was just telling Greshma on the chat on the side that I'm a UPISA like her. So yeah, for all those people out there looking to for a really good university, to teach you really unique ideas, UPIS, right? So yeah, thank you, Bintu, for bringing us together to try and think about this problem. I must say that it's a difficult question. I think it's one of those things that needs 3-4 webinars and maybe a full conference to think about, how does a secular state get influenced by our religious beliefs? It's exciting that we've begun that process of trying to unpack what it means. I just thought to mention a few things that I thought about while the reflections were going on. I think, Mahmoud Mamdani says that the colonial experience in Africa created a bifurcated post-colonial African state. I think it also created a bifurcated African mind. We can't seem to connect those two things. I was thinking about what Angelique was saying about the triple planetary crisis. This is climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And if you think about it, where does this come from? Is it a natural occurrence that there would be pollution? Is it a natural occurrence that biodiversity loss would occur? Well, we're not sure about climate change. There are those who are trying, there's that research that comes from oil companies that says it's a natural event after some thousands of years. But I think the IPCC has been definitive that it is is created by human activities. These are crises created by the Anthropocene. So it means that some culture created these planetary crises. Maybe those are the questions we should be asking ourselves. Because if we can't ask that question, then we can't ask what the secular state can do in terms of thinking about our beliefs and how our beliefs can influence environmental policy and practice for better confronting the planetary crisis. I wonder whether the triple heritage tradition that Professor Ali Mazrui teaches has anything to tell. I mean, is this mixture of three confusing cultures part of what creates a planetary crisis that is also in triple form? I don't know. I'm just wondering about those kinds of things. I think Angelique mentioned a number of times about the repugnancy clause, which is something that affects, the Indian legal tradition, the Nigerian legal tradition, and the Kenyan legal tradition. Those of us who are unfortunate to have been colonized and to still be colonized by the British and the English tradition, and this idea of a repugnancy clause. I've always wondered, when you think about that repugnancy clause as written, it does not make reference to African or Indian culture. Why do we read it and think it's our cultures that are repugnant? Maybe it is the Western culture that is. Maybe this kind of thinking where we stop and just go back to the roots and ask ourselves, is there really anything in this text that says there's something repugnant about my culture, that my culture cannot represent an advanced environmental policy? Maybe the repugnancy comes from Western cultures, from the colonial cultures. And as Angelique says, maybe yes, then the repugnancy clause has some use if we understand that it is probably us, it challenges us to ask ourselves whether we actually value our traditions. I was really inspired by what Greshma was saying, that there is that work to do to think about what our cultures provide as practices that are useful, so that we almost resuscitate and capture that was getting lost, because there is great promise, as Dr. Ngozi has been saying, from our practices that advance environmental protection. I am deeply honored by this panel, this diverse, fascinating panel. We at Kabarak University Press are excited. We hope we will continue to do more of this. We want to ensure that there is more knowledge products that come out of this. So please feel free to go out and write. We run a blog called the Faith and Environment blog, where we have these kind of musings. So please feel free to write a 1,000-word, 1,500-word piece reflecting on your own experience and practice on faith and environment matters, so that as we build a global South bank of knowledge that can look the repugnancy clause in the eye and say, yes, it is you, the colonial culture. It's repugnant, not us. Thank you very much, all of you. For me, I'm just overwhelmed with honor and thanks for your participation. We look forward to more of this. Thank you so much. Blessing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for the amazing discussion. Thank you for continuing the conversation. And yes, Dina Awino is saying that, hi, my name is Kawino Dina. This is a great conversation. Yes, indeed it was. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for the people who, for our audience members who were able to attend, the technical team, much thanks. Yes, see you again. Have a lovely evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you too. Bye.
Bye,
Bye. Thank you
everyone.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
Look
everyone.
forward to
Nice meeting
connect.
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.